In a world where silence reigns louder than a gunshot, a man named Jedediah Crow had not spoken to a soul in 15 long, lonesome years. Nestled deep in the rugged expanse of the Wyoming Territory, his homestead stood like a lone sentinel against the merciless winds that howled across the plains, a testament to solitude and the weight of unspoken grief. Once a man of the law, a protector of the weak, he now found himself haunted by the shadows of his past, the bitter taste of loss still fresh on his tongue. The memories of his beloved wife, lost to the whims of fate, were etched into the very boards of his cabin. Each creak a reminder of the laughter that once filled the air, now replaced by an echoing emptiness. Jedediah had chosen isolation, believing the silence would safeguard him from the anguish of the world and the judgment of men. Yet as the sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood and fire, he could never shake the feeling that he was meant for something greater. His days melded into one another, marked only by the rhythm of chores and the distant call of coyotes, until that fateful evening when the knock at his door shattered the stillness like a bolt of lightning splitting the night. A deaf girl stood before him, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and determination. In her small hands she clutched a note, its edges frayed and worn. It was a message from his wife, a plea from beyond the grave that pulled at the frayed strings of his heart. But the note was not the only thing that had drawn her to his doorstep. Behind her, emerging from the shadows, were two Native American youths, dirt-streaked faces and anxious eyes darting back and forth, desperation etched in their every movement. They were a vision of vulnerability against the stark backdrop of the West, where the ground was as unforgiving as the men who walked it. Jedediah's instincts kicked in. He sensed the danger that loomed. The stories of violence and prejudice against their kind were rampant in towns where lawmen turned a blind eye, and businessmen exploited the weak for profit. As he looked from the girl to the two Native Americans, a tempest of conflicting emotions brewed within him, forcing him to confront the very prejudices he had long tried to bury. Should he turn them away, ensuring his own safety, or invite danger into his life once more by offering help? Was his reclusive existence worth the cost of allowing others to suffer? The choice weighed heavily on him, like a noose tightening around his neck. The wind whispered tales of the unforgiving world outside, as Jedediah wrestled with the ghosts of his past and the specter of his own conscience. "Why have you come?" he finally managed to ask, his voice rough like gravel, breaking years of silence. The girl stepped forward, her hands moving swiftly in the universal language of signs, her face a mask of urgency. They were being hunted, she communicated, a brutal group of men led by a corrupt lawman who sought to exploit their plight. They had come to him for sanctuary, a hope that perhaps this once he might defy the unjust world that had cast them aside. In that moment, Jedediah felt the weight of his own convictions pressing down on him. The rage that had simmered inside him for years, a fire stoked by loss and regret, ignited anew. His heart raced as he recalled the promises he had made to protect the innocent, to stand up for what was right. Yet a flicker of fear nagged at him, whispering that to help them was to risk everything he had built around himself, to shatter the fragile peace he had clung to in solitude. Here was the crossroads of his existence, where principle met peril. He could remain a recluse, a shadow of the man he once was, or he could step into the light, ready to face the consequences of his actions. The stakes were as high as the mountains surrounding his home, and Jedediah felt the ground shifting beneath him, pushing him toward a decision that would define not only his future, but the lives of those standing in front of him. "Stay here," he said, the words tasting foreign on his tongue. "I'll see what I can do." The two youths exchanged glances of disbelief, their expressions a mix of hope and fear. The deaf girl smiled, a spark of gratitude illuminating her face. But as Jedediah turned back to the darkness beyond his door, he knew the danger was far from over. The corrupt lawman, a man whose name was whispered in the shadows and whose greed knew no bounds, would soon come looking for them. Jedediah had no illusions about the world he was stepping back into. It was a place where men exploited the vulnerable, where right and wrong were blurred, and where moral choices came at a steep price. As night fell and the stars blinked like distant sentinels in the vast expanse above, Jedediah Crow prepared to confront the demons of his past. He had chosen a path once more, a path that would test his resolve, challenge his principles, and ultimately lead him to discover whether redemption could be found in the most unlikely of alliances. The quiet of his existence was shattered, and in its place a storm was brewing, one that would change everything he thought he knew about himself and the world around him. In the heart of the Old West, where silence had once ruled, the time for action had come. Would he rise to meet the challenge, or would he once again retreat into the shadows of his own making? The choices ahead were fraught with danger and uncertainty, and yet, deep down, Jedediah felt the flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he could find a way to make a difference once more. With dawn breaking, a pale light crept through the cracks of Jedediah's cabin, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the still air. The quiet was shattered, not by the echoes of gunfire, but by the soft rustle of a note, its edges worn from the grip of small hands. The deaf girl, with her bright eyes and spirit unyielding, had returned, this time with a message that bore the weight of desperation. Jedediah studied her, realizing she was no ordinary child. She was a bridge between worlds, a living testament to resilience in the face of adversity. Yet as he read the note, a plea for help, a warning of the danger lurking nearby, an unfamiliar fear gripped his heart. The Native Americans had become targets in a game of greed, and he was now entangled in their plight, whether he wanted to be or not. The shadows of the mountains loomed in the distance, their majesty a stark contrast to the darkness that lingered in men's hearts. Jedediah's mind raced with the implications of the girl's message. The corrupt businessman, a man named Silas Rourke, had long been a thorn in the side of the local tribes, using his influence to sway lawmen and manipulate the land for his own gain. Rourke was ruthless, a puppet master pulling strings that ensnared the innocent, and now Jedediah realized he had set his sights on the very people he had just chosen to protect. With determination coursing through him, Jedediah turned to the girl. He would not let fear dictate his actions. He gestured for her to follow him, moving toward the small group of Native Americans who had taken refuge in the wooded area behind his property. Each step felt like a march against the current of his own past, but he pressed on, a man awakening to a sense of duty he thought long buried. As they approached, he could see the wary expressions etched on their faces, grief mixed with the haunting shadows of mistrust. They had come to him in their time of need, and now they looked to him for guidance, for hope. Jedediah knew he must convey to them that he stood with them, not against them. This was a moment where words mattered, where conviction could forge bonds stronger than steel. "Listen," he spoke, his voice steady and clear. "I'm not like the others. I've made my mistakes, but I aim to make them right. Rourke is coming for you, and we can't wait for him to strike first." The girl translated his words, her hands moving gracefully through the air, the urgency reflected in her expression. He watched as the members of the group exchanged glances, their guarded postures slowly shifting as they considered his proposal. It was a fragile alliance, built on the foundations of mutual need and shared danger. Jedediah laid out a plan, one that relied not on violence, but on strategy. Together, they would gather evidence against Rourke, expose the web of deceit he had woven, and turn the tide against a man who thought himself untouchable. They would use the element of surprise, drawing on the skills of the Native Americans, their knowledge of the land and the courage that coursed through their veins. As they began to work together, a sense of purpose enveloped them. Yet lurking in the background was the ever-looming threat of Rourke and his men, a storm that threatened to break at any moment. But Jedediah had never been one to back down from a fight. The weight of his past was heavy, yet the burden felt lighter now that he was no longer alone. With allies beside him, the potential for change began to take shape. The girl's laughter, though silent, echoed in his heart, a reminder that hope could blossom even in the most barren of places. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and crimson, the stakes were set. The battle for justice was about to unfold, not with gunfire, but with truth, a weapon far more powerful than any six-shooter, and Jedediah Crow was ready to face whatever came next for the sake of the innocent and the promise of redemption. As the last rays of sunlight faded into the unforgiving night, Jedediah and his newfound companions gathered around a flickering fire, the shadows dancing like ghosts on the rocky terrain. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and the sound of hushed voices plotting their next move against the machinations of Rourke. The girl, whose name was Ayanna, sat close to the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames. Though her world was silent, she carried a wisdom that belied her youth. She understood the stakes, the desperation of her people, and the darkness that Rourke brought upon them. It was as if the land itself listened, holding its breath in anticipation of the storm. Jedediah felt the weight of their expectations. He was no longer just a recluse, he was a leader, a protector. The flicker of hope ignited by Ayanna's presence pushed him to confront the ghosts of his past. His wife's memory haunted him, a bittersweet reminder of the life he had lost and the love that had once filled his heart. He had buried that part of himself deep within, but now, under the watchful eyes of his companions, it began to stir once more. As night deepened, a sense of urgency permeated the air. They had to act before Rourke tightened his grip on the land and the people. Jedediah spoke quietly, outlining a plan. They would gather information about Rourke's operations, the web of corruption that ensnared not only the Native Americans, but any who dared to oppose him. Ayanna's keen intuition would guide them, her silent observations revealing truths hidden from others. Just as the plan began to take shape, a rustle from the darkened woods sent a chill down their spines. The tension was palpable as they drew closer together, readying themselves for whatever might emerge from the shadows. It was then that a figure stepped into the firelight, a man disheveled and weary. Jedediah squinted, recognizing the stranger as one of Rourke's former associates, a man named Clyde, who had fallen out of favor. The desperation in Clyde's eyes told a story of its own. He had come seeking refuge, fleeing the very man who had once been his ally. "I know things," Clyde stammered, his voice shaky, but the urgency in his tone was unmistakable. "Things about Rourke, things that could change everything." Jedediah weighed his options, the man's arrival a double-edged sword. Trust was a scarce commodity, yet Clyde's knowledge could turn the tide in their favor. The choice echoed in the air like gunfire. "Speak," Jedediah ordered, his voice steady, though uncertainty clawed at him. Clyde took a deep breath, glancing at Ayanna before continuing. "Rourke's planning something big. He aims to push the rest of the tribe off their land, use it for mining. But he's got a buyer, someone high up in the government. It's a deal that could bring him riches beyond imagination, and he'll stop at nothing to seal it." The revelation hung heavy in the air, the weight of greed and betrayal palpable. Jedediah felt the fire of determination flare within him. They had to expose Rourke's treachery, but first, they needed proof. Ayanna, sensing the gravity of the situation, stepped forward, gesturing with her hands, her expression fierce yet clear. She proposed a plan. They would infiltrate Rourke's camp under the cover of darkness and gather the evidence they needed. The risk was immense, but the stakes were even higher. The group fell silent, each lost in their thoughts, weighing the peril against the promise of freedom. In that moment, Jedediah made his choice. With allies beside him, he would face the storm, not as a man haunted by the past, but as a beacon of hope for those who had none. The battle for justice had truly begun, and he was determined to see it through, for Ayanna, for the tribe, and for the memory of love that had once guided him. The night crept in, cloaking the land in a veil of darkness that felt alive with tension. Jedediah and Ayanna, along with the few brave souls willing to stand beside them, moved like shadows toward Rourke's camp. The flickering of campfires danced in the distance, illuminating faces twisted by greed and malice. As they approached, a low rumble of laughter reached their ears, harsh and mocking, filled with the confidence of men who believed themselves untouchable. But the deeper they moved into enemy territory, the more Jedediah felt the weight of his choices pressing down upon him. He had vowed to protect these people, yet here he was, risking their lives in a dangerous game against a man more cunning than a rattlesnake. Suddenly, the ground beneath them crunched underfoot, and the laughter stopped. The camp fell silent, as if the night itself held its breath. In that moment, Rourke appeared from the shadows, flanked by armed thugs who bore the look of men who enjoyed their work too much. The glint of moonlight off his badges and belt buckles made him appear almost regal in the flickering firelight, but Jedediah knew better. "Well, well, if it isn't the noble rancher come to save the day," Rourke drawled, his voice dripping with derision. "You've got guts showing up here, Jedediah. What do you think you're doing? These savages don't belong here. You're just making it worse for yourself." Jedediah stood his ground, heart pounding but resolve steady. "They're not savages, Rourke. They're people, people who deserve a chance to live on their own land." Rourke's laughter echoed through the camp, harsh and mocking. "You really think you can stop what's coming? I've got the law on my side, and you? Just a ghost of the past, haunted by your own failures." The taunt stung, but a fire ignited within Jedediah. "It's not just about me anymore. I've got allies now. People who see the truth." With a wave of his hand, Rourke dismissed the thought. "Allies? You mean these 3 lost souls? They'll pay the price for your foolishness. You're just a pawn in a game you can't comprehend." Then came the twist, like a knife in the dark. Ayanna stepped forward, voice unwavering. "You don't know who we are, Rourke. You're so blinded by greed that you can't see the truth standing right in front of you." Rourke's smug expression faltered, confusion flickering across his face. "What are you talking about, girl? You're nothing but a footnote in my story." Ayanna's eyes shone with fierce clarity. "I am Ayanna of the Lakota, and this land is as much mine as it is yours. You've lied, and your lies will unravel." The air thickened with tension, and the camp shifted, men glancing nervously at one another. "What are you insinuating?" Rourke spat, but the doubt had taken root. Jedediah seized the moment. "You're not just fighting for land, Rourke. You're fighting against the truth, and truth has a way of coming out no matter how deep you bury it." The stakes had shifted. Uncertainty filled the space between them. Rourke's bravado cracked, revealing the desperate man beneath. The real battle was not just for land, but for justice itself. "You'll regret this, Jedediah. You've made a grave mistake." But as Rourke turned to rally his men, the weight of his own corruption pressed down upon him like a boulder. The tide had turned. Jedediah stood tall, not just as a man haunted by the past, but as a warrior for a future where truth might finally prevail. In that moment, the boundaries of fear and courage blurred. The night had unleashed an unexpected alliance, and the dawn would reveal the consequences of their stand against the darkness. The battle for justice was far from over, but now it burned brighter than ever. With the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon, a fragile alliance had been forged in the shadows of night. Jedediah felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, heavier than the burden of his solitude. He glanced at the Native Americans, their eyes reflecting both fear and hope, and he understood that he was not just fighting for them, but for a world that had forgotten their humanity. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, but it did little to warm the chill that clung to the morning air. Jedediah gathered the small group in a huddle, their breaths visible in the coolness, a silent testament to their shared resolve. "We need to be smart about this," he said, his voice steady. "Rourke and his men will come for us. We can't let fear dictate our next move." A young woman, the deaf girl from the night before, stepped forward, her fingers dancing in the air as she signed her determination. The others nodded, inspired by her silent strength. Jedediah felt a spark of hope flicker within him. In a world that had turned its back on them, they had each other. As they made plans, a distant rumble grew louder, the sound of hooves pounding against the earth. Rourke was rallying his men, and soon they would descend upon the ranch, armed and furious. Jedediah's mind raced, contemplating the strategies they could employ. A frontal assault would be folly, but a well-planned ambush could turn the tide. "Listen," he said, his voice rising above the clamor of approaching hooves. "We'll lead them away from the ranch, draw them into the canyon. The terrain is on our side. We use the element of surprise." He looked around, gauging the faces of those who stood with him. "This is our chance. If we can expose Rourke for the monster he is, we can save ourselves and the land." The group nodded in agreement, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. They moved quickly, gathering what few weapons and supplies they could find, each item laden with the weight of their shared desperation. The girl's fingers flew, communicating plans and strategies, her spirit undeterred by the looming confrontation. As they prepared to set their trap, a revelation struck Jedediah like a bolt of lightning. The note the girl had delivered from his wife was no mere message. It was a lifeline, a reminder of the love he had lost, and the fight he had to reclaim that love for the sake of the innocent. Rourke's greed had not only threatened the land, but had sought to sever the very ties that bound them to their humanity. Time slipped away, the sound of galloping hooves drawing closer. Jedediah's heart raced as he positioned the group at the narrow mouth of the canyon. the rocky walls rising steeply on either side, offering both cover and concealment. He knew that once the battle began, there would be no turning back. The stakes had never been higher, and the truth they sought to uncover was buried deep within Rourke's corrupt soul. As the first of Rourke's men crested the hill, Jedediah took a deep breath, steadying himself against the tide of memories that threatened to overwhelm him. He thought of his wife, her laughter echoing in his mind, and the promise he had made to protect those who could not protect themselves. This was more than a fight for survival. It was a fight for redemption. With a final nod to his newfound allies, he whispered, "Now." And as they sprang into action, the weight of a past unspoken hung in the air, mingling with the dust of the earth, ready to rise and confront the truth that had long been buried. The battle for justice was about to begin. A deafening silence engulfed the canyon as Jedediah and his allies took their positions. The tension was palpable, an electric charge coursing through the air. Jedediah's heart pounded in his chest, not just from fear, but from a fierce resolve that pushed him forward. He had spent 15 long years in the shadow of grief, but now, in this moment of impending violence, he felt the stirrings of purpose once more. Rourke's men moved with a predatory grace, eyes scanning the landscape, seeking any sign of trouble. Their arrogance was their greatest flaw, and Jedediah knew it would be his advantage. He could see the rough features of the men silhouetted against the fading sun, their faces hardened by cruelty and greed. They had come to finish what they believed was a simple hunt, but they were about to discover the depths of the courage that lay hidden within the heart of one man. As the first of Rourke's henchmen stepped into the canyon, a rock slide of dust and gravel cascaded down, giving Jedediah the opening he needed. He signaled silently, and his allies moved with precision, emerging from their concealed spots, ready to defend the vulnerable souls they had come together to protect. Jedediah's mind raced, contemplating the stakes of each action. This was not merely a fight against an oppressor, it was a battle to reclaim the very fabric of their shared humanity. Yet, amid the chaos, a flicker of doubt gnawed at him. He recalled the little girl who had knocked on his door, the deaf child whose bravery had sparked a change in his heart. He thought of the innocent lives caught in this web of corruption, and a new determination surged within him. He would not allow fear to dictate his choices any longer. As the first shot rang out, echoing against the canyon walls, Jedediah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, his senses heightened. But he remained focused, calculating, weaving through the chaos with a careful grace. They were outnumbered, yes, but he had something they did not, an unwavering belief in justice. Rourke's men began to falter, caught off guard by the tenacity of their opponents. Jedediah could see the confusion spreading among them, their confidence slowly waning. That was when he spotted Rourke himself, perched on a distant ridge, a scowl etched across his face, a sneer that revealed the arrogance of power. But there was something else in Rourke's eyes, fear as the realization dawned that he had underestimated Jedediah and those who stood with him. Suddenly, the tide began to turn. Rourke's men were not mere brutes. They were pawns in a larger game, manipulated by their leader's greed. Jedediah noticed the way some hesitated, doubt creeping into their hearts. They had been sold a lie, a false narrative that pitted them against the innocent. He could use that to his advantage. In a moment of clarity, he raised his voice, calling out to them, "You don't have to do this. This fight isn't yours. It's Rourke's. He's the one who profits while you bleed." His words cut through the cacophony, and for a brief moment time seemed to stand still. The men exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. As the first of Rourke's men hesitated, another voice joined Jedediah's, one that carried the weight of truth. The deaf girl, emboldened by the bravery of those around her, stepped forward, her hands moving swiftly in sign language. Jedediah had learned the basics from her, and he interpreted her words aloud. "We are not your enemy. We are all part of this land. Stand with us against the real threat." Jedediah watched as more of Rourke's men lowered their weapons, their resolve cracking under the truth laid bare before them. The canyon, once a battleground of violence, transformed into a space of revelation. The moral choice had shifted, and the lines drawn in the sand began to blur. Rourke's anger boiled over as he realized his grip was slipping. He shouted commands, but they fell on deaf ears. His men were beginning to see the truth of their situation, and that truth was a powerful weapon. Just as the confrontation seemed poised to unravel, a shot rang out from Rourke's direction, targeting the deaf girl. In that harrowing moment, Jedediah's instincts kicked in. He moved without thinking, shielding her with his own body. The bullet grazed his arm, a searing pain igniting, but he held firm, refusing to let fear dictate his actions. It was now or never. The canyon was alive with the sound of gunfire, but it was also alive with the sound of awakening. The men who once stood against them were now standing with them, united against a common enemy. Rourke's reign of terror was on the brink of collapse, and in the whirlwind of chaos and revelation, the truth would finally come to light. The dust settled as Rourke's men, once so eager to follow his lead, now faced the reality of their choices. They turned their backs on the corruption that had clouded their judgment, and the weight of their complicity began to lift. Jedediah, standing strong despite his wound, called out to them, his voice steady and resolute. "Look around you," he urged, his gaze sweeping over the disheartened faces. "This ain't about color or creed. It's about our humanity. You all know what Rourke's been doing. He's been using you to line his own pockets while the innocent suffer. Will you be his pawns, or will you stand for what's right?" One by one, the men lowered their weapons, the grip of fear replaced by the courage to confront the truth. Rourke's fury erupted, but it was a fleeting fire, a last desperate attempt to cling to power. With the tide turned against him, he found himself cornered by the very forces he had sought to manipulate. The respect that once shrouded him faded, exposing him as the coward he truly was. In that climactic moment, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the canyon floor, the truth came crashing down upon Rourke. The men he had threatened and coerced now gathered, not as enemies but as allies united by a shared sense of justice. They bore witness to the corruption that had festered in their midst, and with each revelation, Rourke's facade crumbled. Then a brave soul stepped forward, a familiar face among the crowd. It was the young man who had once fought against his own people, manipulated by Rourke's lies. "I was blind," he confessed, his voice shaking. "But now I see. We all have a choice. We can stand together and expose this villain for who he is." The weight of his words resonated through the canyon, igniting a fire within the hearts of those who had once been blinded by fear. They turned on Rourke, uniting against the darkness he had wrought, their voices a chorus of courage ringing out against the injustices he had perpetrated. Rourke's downfall was not marked by the gun, but by the strength of community and the collective will to fight for what was right. The sound of surrender filled the air as he was bound by those he had once sought to control. Justice had come not through violence, but through the power of truth and the courage to confront it. As the dust began to settle, Jedediah stood alongside the vulnerable ones he had fought to protect, the deaf girl now safe in his arms. The canyon, once a symbol of division, transformed into a space of healing and unity. They had defied the odds, challenged the prejudices of the time, and in doing so redefined what it meant to be brave. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, a reminder of the sacrifice made and the journey ahead. Jedediah looked out at the faces around him, a newfound sense of hope igniting in his heart. "In this land, we can't afford to be divided," he said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared experience. "It's time to stand for each other, to let justice and mercy guide our path forward." And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, a new chapter began to unfold for those who had once been lost in darkness. The Old West had taught them many lessons, but perhaps the greatest of all was that true courage lies not in the face of violence, but in the quiet resolve to do what is right, to extend mercy where none was expected, and to fight for justice for all. As the dust settled in the canyon, the question lingered in the air. What choices would they make in this harsh land, where the line between right and wrong was often drawn in blood? The echoes of their actions would be felt for generations to come, a testament to the power of unity in the face of adversity.